Recently, I bulked up from 130 pounds to 170 pounds, and I did it in less than 6 months. It was one of the most difficult challenges that I've put myself through, and I did it as a hard gainer while also at the same time running my own business. Now, there's already thousands of videos out there talking about how to train, what to eat, how to track your macros. And the thing is, if the information were the only thing stopping people from bulking, well, then everyone would be able to pull it off. But if you're anything like me, I did at least 5 or 6 bulks, and a couple weeks into it, just fell off because I wasn't able to stay consistent. So in this video, I want to talk about how to stay consistent with it long enough to actually see results. First, I want to talk about why most bulks fail in the first place. One of the things that held me back for a long time was thinking that this had to be a whole lifestyle change, when in reality, it was just a short sprint to get me from point A to point B, and that's it. Because the reality is, the bulk is going to be challenging. You're going to always feel bloated, sick, tired. And for me, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to feel like this long term, so I'm just going to quit. But the thing is, yes, it is uncomfortable for the few months that you're doing it, but once it's over, it's over. So treat it like just a short sprint. Set yourself, 4 or 6 months, and just commit to it for that period of time. Once you're done, you're done. Another pattern that I noticed that kept me from actually getting consistent and putting on weight was the pain of my current situation wasn't greater than my desire to change. And what I mean by that is I was comfortable enough being skinny. I wasn't actually in enough pain in my current situation to actually need to make that change. And what changed it for me was I went out recently to a mastermind out in Florida. Tons of entrepreneurs came to it, and it was overall a great time. But when I pulled up, I realized I was the smallest person there. Everyone was in really good shape. They were all filling out their t-shirts, and I showed up wearing like a t-shirt, and it was just like loose. And I felt super insecure because I was the smallest guy there. I was like literally 130 pounds. All these guys were in great shape. And it was at that moment I realized I need to lock in. You're too comfortable. And I even told my business partner, I'm like, okay, after seeing all these guys, I am going to lock in on the bulk. And that was the day I actually committed to the change. So if you're still a little bit comfortable with where you're at, get in a different room or find a way to actually put yourself in enough pain so you actually commit to that change. And another silent killer is not being honest with yourself about your macros. The first couple bulks that I did, I thought I was tracking, but in reality, when I thought I was eating 4,000 calories, I was only eating, 1,800, 1,500. So be completely honest with yourself when you're tracking your macros. And something that I did that actually allowed me to, make consistent results on this latest bulk was, let's say it could be, you're not sure, it could be 800 calories or it could be, 1,500 calories. Maybe you don't know all the ingredients. Err on the side of tracking it as something lower, tracking it as 800, and worst case it is 15 and you're just in more of a surplus, which means you get results faster. But you have to be completely honest with yourself, because it's so easy to think you're hitting a certain amount of macros when in reality you're not. Now, if I had to pin down the one thing that I did that allowed me to stay consistent, was actually something that I did before even hopping on the bulk. And that is basically objection handling myself. And what I mean by that is, before committing to it, there's always these excuses in the back of my mind. For example, I'm gonna have face fat and acne. Or the other one that I was telling myself is, I'm running a business, I'm busy, and what this is gonna do is make me tired, give me brain fog, and slow me down, and not allow me to be optimal in the business. So that was something that I had to sit down with myself before even starting this and just write down those excuses and ask myself, is this actually a valid excuse? Or is this something that I'm telling myself which is gonna hold me back from the bulk? Because multiple times I started the bulk, and then a couple weeks in, I'm like, well, I'm too slow, I'm too tired, I need to run the business, and I would just quit. So for you, sit down with a pen and paper and give yourself all the excuses that you can think of that might derail you from the bulk. Write them down, and if you're serious about hopping on the bulk, under each excuse, write down why it's just an excuse and why that's not actually gonna hold you back from staying consistent on the bulk. And once you've actually started, you have to realize this is a non-negotiable. The first couple bulks that failed because I gave myself room to argue with myself. Maybe I was tired and I didn't want to get up and cook a meal and to hit my macros. But if you're going to commit to this, you have to realize it's a non-negotiable. For me, this meant staying up late, just sitting in bed, shoving food in my mouth when I felt like I was gonna puke. Like it's going to be a challenging sprint, but you have to make it a non-negotiable every single day to hit your macros, and just there's no room to argue with yourself. Once you start negotiating with yourself, that's when it's game over, because once you let one thing slip, then your standards become lower and lower until you just completely fall off. So set the standard, set a calorie goal that you have to hit every single day, and stick to it as a non-negotiable. Now, if you take one thing from this video, I want it to be this. You have to find a way to hold yourself accountable. So I'll tell you what I did. Maybe you can do something similar. So before I even started, I told my buddy, I said, look, I'm going to hit 170 pounds in 6 months. For me, it was by March 3rd. So I had 6 months from the time of saying that. And if I didn't hit it, I told him, I'll pay you $500. $500 was enough that I could pay it to him, but it was also enough that it would actually hurt if I didn't follow through and actually do it. And I highly recommend you do something like that, because if I hadn't put that bet in place, I would have fallen off within a couple weeks, no doubt, because even though I sat down and objection handled myself and wrote out the excuses, it still wasn't quite strong enough to actually keep me in the bulk, because it's challenging. Like every single day you're consuming food that your body does not want to take in, and you have to have a really good reason why you're going to stick with it. Having a bet that you hold yourself accountable with is very helpful. Another thing I did was I told all of my friends, everyone I met, that I was doing this challenge, and basically everyone knew about it. So if I was just going to drop out and flake, well, that was going to be embarrassing, and I didn't want to be a quitter in front of everyone that I'd told. So ideally, just make it public, and also make it so you have stakes. If you fail, you actually have a consequence. And another thing that I did was I teamed up with my lifting partner, and we're both on the bulk at the same time. So if you can find someone else who's also bulking, that's helpful. And what I did was we tracked our macros, and every night before bed, we just send a screenshot of our end of day macros to show that we've hit it, send it to each other, we just text it. And that was another great thing just to keep us accountable. So if you actually zoom out and look at what was actually in place, I had the screenshots that I had to send every night. I told everyone I met, knew, etc. Basically everyone in my life knew that I was on this challenge. And on top of that, if I didn't hit my goal within the time frame, I had to pay $500. So I think that was kind of the perfect storm to actually keep me accountable. But ideally, when you're starting this bulk, look at how many, just think through how can I add as much accountability to the process as possible so I don't drop off, because it's going to be hard. Now, when it comes to the actual strategy, there are a few things that I learned on the bulk. The first one is make it as simple as possible to hit your macros. Even if it means like not even meal prepping, for me, I would just find easy to consume foods, put those in the fridge, and just that was that. So I wasn't even doing a lot of meal prep. For example, I would have avocados in the fridge, that's an easy 300 calories. I'd have the classic for me was a Dixie cup with milk and maple syrup, and that was an easy like 400 calories. So just finding like super simple foods that are easy to get down but require basically no prep. Ideally, that's the big lever you can pull, because if you think about it, you're gonna be busy. There's gonna be days when you're running out the door and you don't have time to cook. So you need to at least have backup options so you can just grab quick calories, get them in, and get back to day-to-day life. Another thing that I realized on the bulk is aim for clean and settle for dirty. And what I mean by that is, there are so many people who just do a dirty bulk and they end up regretting it because they're fat and they can't really lose the weight as easily as they thought. On the other hand, you have people who just do a clean bulk, and most of them drop off before they even gain any weight, because it's just so impossible to eat chicken and rice 6 times a day every single day for months on end. So my strategy, my theory around this was aim for clean. So try to get clean meals in for at least 60 to 80% of my macros. And then let's say I get to the end of the day and I still need 1,000 calories. I'm not going to try and eat another dry bowl of chicken and rice. So instead I just eat a donut or some chocolate milk or something that's not as clean. But when you actually zoom out and look at the macros on a weekly basis, ideally, I think it was probably 60-70% clean, and then the other percent was dirty. So just keep that in mind, because I think a lot of people go all in on one side or the other, but in reality, it's kind of just going to be a balance. Another thing that was really important for me on the bulk was getting my first meal in as soon as possible. If you're anything like me as a hard gainer, the thought of food just disgusts you, especially on the bulk. Like, I'm cutting now, so I actually kind of want food, but when your body is so full of food all the time, and then you're topping it off with more food, nothing sounds more disgusting. But you have to fight that urge, specifically early in the morning, because if I missed my early morning meal, the problem was that would push me out later in the day, and that meant I was at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I still had calories to get in, which also threw off my sleep schedule, which just made everything worse. So ideally, if I could nail the morning meal, which I did not want to eat, nothing sounded worse than that, but if I could nail that morning meal, that kind of set up the whole day so I could get my macros in and also get to bed at a reasonable time. So overall, my experience with the bulk is it sucked. It was one of the most challenging, difficult things that I've done in a while, because like I said, nothing about me wants to be eating this much food. Like, for context, I'm the type of person who can go a full day without eating and not really get hungry. So for me, I was on 4,000 calories a day. I started with 6,000 calories a day for day one, and I ended up puking at like 1 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon, because I'd already eaten like 4,000 calories, all that gone. So I decided to bump it down to 4,000. But overall, it was a miserable experience, but it was necessary. And I probably won't ever do like a full aggressive bulk like I just did, but I think it was necessary to get me from 0 to 1 and just add on some decent size. And now moving forward, I can just do a less aggressive bulk, maybe add 5-10 pounds, but to go from 130 to 170 in that short of a period of time was a sprint. Like I said, once you realize it's just a sprint and you just commit to it, that's when it becomes easier. But overall, it sucked, but I do recommend it just to get that initial size put on. If you're watching this and you're about to start a bulk, or you've already started on the bulk, ideally you just want to set a weight goal, set a time period, and then actually put the systems in place to hold yourself accountable. So ideally find an accountability partner, maybe make a bet, put the systems in place like I talked about in this video to actually hold yourself accountable. Because like I said, most people don't fail because they don't have the information. They fail because they can't stay consistent long enough. Like for me, I was always watching YouTube videos trying to figure out like all these tips and tricks and hacks, but in reality, it's a simple equation. You just have to eat in a calorie surplus for long enough and you will see results. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one.